Hello, I'm Cassie McCullough and I'm talking not too loudly because I'm here in the Mitchell Reading Room at the State Library of New South Wales. But the other reason I'm speaking quietly is because the folks at the library have asked me to be part of something that's quite controversial, I think. For World Book Day, they've invited 5 writers to nominate books not just that they love, but ones that they hate as well, which I think's quite fun. It's only fun because, of course, there's as many opinions about books as there are books themselves. So let's hear some.
I think it was W.H. Auden who once said, "Many great books are often undeservedly forgotten, but many terrible books are never unjustly forgotten." And I wish that would happen to this book, The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. I actually don't have a copy on me because as soon as I read it, I had to throw it away. I didn't even put it into a street library. I put it into the recycling bin so no one else would have to read it. A lot of people say, like they say about Harry Potter, "Oh, it's a really great book for people who don't want to read." Who writes a book for people who don't want to read? It's like making a cake for people who don't like to eat. It doesn't make sense to me. It's like vegetarian bacon. The moment I realised I didn't just dislike the Da Vinci Code, or I might be disappointed by it, but that I actually hated it, and anybody involved in its creation or publication, was about probably the 3rd or 4th one-line paragraph on the 1st or 2nd page, in which the protagonist, Robert Langdon, was described as Harrison Ford in tweeds. Are you kidding me? Being that lazy with description made me realise it wasn't going to get any better. And I sometimes wonder, did they change the film tie-in of the Da Vinci Code to make Robert Langdon look like Tom Hanks in tweeds? Who cares? Because as far as I'm concerned, it was the worst book and pretty much, I've heard, the worst film ever. That's going to be at least 12 minutes of my life I'll never get back again.
Yes, Dan Brown, lowbrow hate. I went to a French school, and at my French school we were introduced much too early to Victor Hugo's masterpiece, Les Miserables. 5 volumes. Now, who wants to read 5 volumes of anything other than adventure stories when they're 13, 14? First of all, we got given the text in dictation, and it was always stolid and heavy and terribly descriptive and very dense. And then we were asked to read. Look, I can hardly hold the volume up. It's so bloody heavy. It's like several phone books plus the Bible. If I open it at any page, randomly, there's no dialogue. There's no dialogue. And yet there are hundreds of characters in this thing. Of course, as anyone who's seen the musical, which I recommend instead of this, knows, it's about an ex-convict called Jean Valjean and his experience of redemption. And one of the things that Victor Hugo does, which is so difficult for a young mind, is that he uses the novel as a kind of polemic for all sorts of issues that he wants to address in terms of social justice, which is fine, but at 13 and 14 and 15, you don't care about the construction of the Paris sewers, and you don't have any views on the future of convents. So I found this book really, really difficult, and I have not gone back to it. I probably should, but I'm not sure that I will.
Da Vinci Code, don't get me started. As far as another book that I hate, On the Road, when I was younger, like all people who love to travel, I was obsessed with it. As I've become older and kind of realized what Jack Kerouac was about, I've started to loathe the book more as the years go by. On the Road is a book about a man called Sal Paradise who is obsessed with another man called Dean Moriarty. They take this freewheeling tour all around America. The book is full of jazz, drugs, sex, adventure, everything that you glamorize when you're young. As I've gotten older, I've realized that Sal Paradise was essentially able to do what he was, what he did because he was a young man in 1950s America. The road that he talks about is a road that's always been a space for men and men like him. As the cultural context of the book sort of dawned on me, I realized that my emotional connection to it was something that was really a lie. On the Road is full of women, but the women are terribly treated. It's a book, that's all about male gaze and the way that men see the world.
My favourite book is this one here, The Complete Nonsense of Edward Lear. Edward Lear, the 19th century painter, artist, draftsman, and writer of nonsense verse that'll be familiar to most of you. This is a story that was read to me by my parents. My favourite is the story of the 4 little children who went round the world. So here's a little excerpt from the story of Violet, Guy, Slingsby and Lionel and their voyage around the world. The next thing that happened to them was in a narrow part of the sea which was so entirely full of fishes that the boat could go on no further. So they remained there for about 6 weeks, till they had eaten nearly all the fishes, which were soles and already cooked and covered with shrimp sauce, so that there was no trouble whatever. And as the few fishes who remained uneaten complained of the cold, as well as of the difficulty they had in getting any sleep on account of the extreme noise made by the Arctic bears and the tropical turnspits, which frequented the neighbourhood in great numbers, Violet most amiably knitted a small woolen frock for several of the fishes, and Slingsby gave them some opium drops, through which kindness they became quite warm and slept soundly. That's proper writing.
I absolutely love Edward Lear too. And another book that I really adore is Elizabeth Gilbert's The Signature of All Things. I think that this book has suffered from a kind of snobbery that people who didn't want to read a book called Eat, Pray, Love wouldn't read this book and couldn't believe that the person who wrote Eat, Pray, Love could write a romping, historical, sweeping, scientific epic like this book, which is a wonderful, wonderful personal adventure focusing on a memorable character, Alma Whitaker, who's born in 1800, and her life kind of encapsulates a century of enlightenment and curiosity. Curiosity is the great driving force behind Alma Whitaker, and her story and her passion for botany, particularly for moss, takes her to, let's see, London, Tasmania, Philadelphia, Tahiti, Amsterdam. The book is littered with memorable characters, secondary characters who include abolitionists, adventurers, astronomers, sea captains. It's romantic at the same time as being a kind of poem to science and knowledge, and it's a deeply satisfying read, and I go back to it about once every 5 years because Alma is just irresistible.
My favourite book, I think the one that left the greatest impact on me, I read it when I was about 13 or 14, was Wuthering Heights, and I lived out in a very small country town on the Hay Plains, and there wasn't much going on, and to read about these 2 star-crossed lovers and windswept moors and the brooding Heathcliff and the beautiful Cathy. I mean, you know, there were the blokes out in Hay where I grew up. They were really good blokes, but they were no Heathcliff, so it was kind of like, be still my beating heart. I saw the film a bit later, and of course I think it's always a mistake to watch a film after you've read the book, because Laurence Olivier didn't sort of cut it for me as Heathcliff. But I loved the feuding families. I loved the drama. I loved the tragedy of it all. You know, and my life was you know, relatively stultifying at that stage. And there was no books in my house, and a teacher at the school gave me Wuthering Heights, and it changed my life. And, you know, like, I just thought, oh God, wouldn't it be great one day to have my name on a book and to be able to write something. I mean, of course, I've never written anything like Wuthering Heights. I mean, who can? And I mean, it's been done, but it left an incredible and indelible impression on me. It still has the power to move me, you know, it still has the power make the blood boil a little and, and the heart quicken.
I'm also a huge fan of Wuthering Heights. I remember reading it in primary school and just being struck by the imagery, the scenes of the moors, the ways in which the interior lives of the characters are mimicked in the weather. Cathy and Heathcliff are the kind of relationship that, doomed from the start. My favourite book of all time is On Beauty. To my mind, this book is the absolutely perfect novel. Like everything that Zadie Smith writes, it's a book about class, it's a book about race, it's a book about different people who come together faced with really kind of interesting circumstances. On Beauty does the thing that all great literature does, is it takes situations out of life and shows how complicated they can be. What I love about On Beauty is it tells a story of an art historian who thinks of himself as progressive and one that thinks of himself as conservative. The main character, Howard, actually that we're thought to think of as being progressive, he ends up having an affair with his wife. What I think is so powerful about it is it shows us that who we are on the surface is not who we are underneath. What I really love about all of Zadie Smith's work is she ends up taking the reader into different worlds. There are a few writers who can show different worlds, different social situations with such power, such colour, such complexity. In On Beauty, she takes us to the college campuses of New England, where people are waging a war over cultural politics. She takes us to the streets, where there's Haitian immigrants who are selling counterfeited bags. She takes us to this poetry salon in this one of the most hilarious scenes in fiction, and she shows us how there's sort of a divide between how people come across and who they are underneath.
I arrived in Sydney to go to a school over in Mossman and Balmoral Beach, and everybody was into The Hobbit. And I was given a copy of The Hobbit. I mean, the girls were doing paintings of their visions of the characters, and they were, our friends were playing albums that were based on The Hobbit, and they gave it to me and they said, "You'll love it, it's wonderful." And I just could not make head nor tail of it. For a start, they had their own language, Elvish, all these different versions of Elvish, and they'd go around sort of greeting each other with these Elvish words and signs and everything, and I was completely bamboozled. I mean, like conversation where I came from basically consisted of, "G'day, how you going? Not bad, you? Yeah, I'm fine. Doing anything tonight? Nah. Okay, catch ya." And then suddenly you get this elaborate language and the names, like Frodo and Gandalf and God knows, Bilbo, I think, I'm not sure. And I mean, everybody out where I came from was called Miko and Dino and Trev and Kev, and so I basically had no idea, the names alone bamboozled me. But the biggest thing was the maps. They're going, "Look, there's only a couple of maps, Gal. I don't know what you find so difficult about it." But where I came from, you directions consisted of, well, you drive down the end of this road, you chuck a right, you drive for 500 miles, then when you get to the end, you'll get to a crossroad, there'll be left, there'll be right, don't go left, go right, and then you keep driving until you come to it. And that was it, that consisted of directions and maps. And I mean, I just, in the end, I just used to nod when people would rave about it. I go, yeah. I've had a go again, people said, "Look, why don't you try it now?" And I still hate it. I hate it with an absolute vengeance. And I will not, even though they say, "Oh, well, you'll love the Ring trilogy." I go, no, thank you. I don't have time. Time is running out for me. I'm in my late 60s. I do not need this in my life. So yes, so that's basically it. I loathed and detested and still loathe and detest The Hobbit.
I love The Hobbit. It was the first big book I ever read, and like an escape into another world. The Lord of the Rings, though, that's another story. I know this is cheating. I know I should just say one book that I really love, but I have to tell you, I've got two. Wonderful by the Australian author Andrew Humphreys, and Meet Cheetah, putatively the autobiography of the famous chimpanzee from the Tarzan movies, both of them featuring talking chimpanzees from the movies, both of them funny, savage, witty, entertaining and deeply moving. Wonderful by Andrew Humphreys, which came out in the early 2000s, tells the story of Joseph Kiss, a Hungarian animal trainer who falls in love with his chimpanzee, Ziggy the Wonder Ape. Ziggy talks to Joseph, or does he? We see a journey not only into the dark heart of war-torn Europe, but into the dark heart of Hollywood and La La Land. Me, Cheetah, when it came out in 2006, was longlisted for the Booker Prize. It was meant to have been written by Cheetah himself, featuring photos and reminiscences of some of Hollywood's greatest stars, including, of course, Johnny Weissmuller, the star of the Tarzan movies, among others. It reads like the best kind of catty celebrity autobiography. It was later revealed that it was actually written by young editor James Lever, who wrote it in 6 weeks as a bet, but it doesn't make it any less engaging or enthralling. If you love books like Dropping Names by Frank Langella, or the kind of bitchy memoir that makes you wish you lived in the golden days of Hollywood again, then get Me, Cheetah. It isn't just funny, it's really beautiful.
When I was asked to think of the book I hate most in the world, it was really pretty easy. The book I hate most in the world, and I'm taking a huge risk here, my least favourite book is Snugglepot and Cuddlepie. One of the most unhappy, traumatic experiences of my childhood was having my mother read me Snugglepot and Cuddlepie, and I have a horror of May Gibbs. I have a horror of May Gibbs writing and a horror of May Gibbs illustrations. There's something deeply, deeply creepy about Snugglepot and Cuddlepie. I'm not sure it'd be allowed today. I'm not even talking about the semiotics of the wicked Banksia men who gave me nightmares, and they give a lot of people today nightmares for other reasons. I'm going to invite you just to look at a drawing May Gibbs of a football scrum, which I promise you wouldn't get past anyone today. And I'm going to read you a paragraph from the story of what happened in Anchovy's garden. Anchovy, another figure who traumatized me in my childhood, so much that my mother had to promise not even to keep the book in my bedroom. She'd take it away and keep it somewhere else. Self-righteous, sanctimonious, I wish that Snugglepot and Cuddlepie had been done away with. Just listen to this. At first, Snugglepot and Ragged Blossom didn't enjoy eating so much wet food, but after a few days they got quite used to it, and they both thought it splendid, never having to wash. Oh, fancy that. Doesn't anybody ever wash down here, Anchovy? Asked Snugglepot. No, asked Anne, but of course we have to scrape. And so it goes on, and on, and on, and on.
Snugglepot and Cuddlepie, that's a bit rough, don't you think? I don't even know if it's legal to say that in Australia. But anyway, we've heard it now and we can't unhear it. But I do agree about Wuthering Heights. I think it is the best book ever written. And every time I read it, it's a completely different book to the last time I read it. So yes, some feisty opinions there, but lots of passion. So happy World Book Day and keep reading.